Hey guys, this is Dr. Bondar and I am live. I hope. I think I maybe did this a little differently this time. Just want to make sure I can still see everybody's comments and stuff when they send them in. Hey, okay, cool. It looks like I've got some people coming. I guess this is the right. Hey, Carrie. Hey, Paula. Hey, Candace and Ian and Nicole. Right on. Hey, Nicole. Thanks for your cool questions. We are going to get to some of that. Hey, yeah, from Australia. Fantastic. So I have all these fantastic questions that you guys sent in from last week. So I really want to get to talking about some of those. Oh, maybe I'll just like say hello to all these cool people that are joining and saying hi. Lisa from my childhood. Hey, girl. David, Nathan, Rico, Sandy, Wayne, Michael, Corey, Jenny, Erica, Nicole. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for showing up, guys. I am looking forward to having a great conversation here about homosexuality. This is a topic that I really like to bring up, especially at a lot of my public lectures, because it's still, you know what, it's astonishing to me how often I will still be somewhere, you know, like on a plane or, you know, just having conversations with people, and there's still a lot of misunderstanding about what homosexuality is and why humans do it or why we don't do it or whether or not it's actually natural. And so that's why I think, you know, the more conversations we can have to that end, the better. So on this very rainy British Columbia night, I hope it is much, much nicer over in some of you are from Australia. It's probably amazing over there. Jason, Louisiana, and Idaho. Larry, hey guys. Hey Jenny, Christian, Evan, Zoe, hi Zoe. Mindy, Ali, Rango, right on. Okay, cool guys. Let's go ahead and start. So I got a question from Angel, first of all, from Angel Dawn. That was bat sex. All about the bats, the one flying mammal. So she wanted to know how many partners, how many babies did they get knocked out before they hibernate? Great questions. And actually, there's a couple things I really wanted to say about bats, because bats to this end do a lot of cool things that are not necessarily associated with homosexuality, but they have a lot of very interesting patterns based on the fact that they are the only mammals that fly. That gives the mothers a lot more responsibility in terms of carrying all that milk around. But bats, like most other mammalian species, do exhibit some homosexual tendencies. And I guess what we have to really try to keep in mind on the bottom line is that individual animals within any population, and I'm talking about vertebrates here, really, you know, so birds, fish, of course, we start with the mammals and then we come right up to sort of the primates and animals that we consider to be very, very close to us, or that we know are very, very close to us. But there are individuals. Populations are made up of individuals, and individuals exhibit diversity in their behavior, in their preferences, in their emotional levels, and all sorts of things that traditionally we haven't given a lot of research focus to these things, because they're very difficult for us to understand. For example, how can you say to any particular animal, hey, would you rather have sex with that boy animal next to you, or would you rather have sex with that girl animal next to you? It's very hard for us to have these conversations. We can only sort of observe what animals are doing and make implicit, you know, conclusions based on that kind of thing. So to that end, individuals in vertebrate populations across the animal kingdom are homosexual. So like, let's just get that cat right out of the bag right now. Invertebrates, okay, all bets are off when we talk about invertebrates. There's so much, this is where we see all the craziest sex ever. But if we're gonna just talk about homosexuality, I think it's probably wisest for us to talk about it in the context of what we're used to. Because people are like, oh no, that's unnatural. That's weird. It's not weird. It's not unnatural at all. Many animals have sex for reasons that do not include procreation. Sex can be pleasurable, as it is for us humans, as it is for many primates, as it is for animals. You know, biologists, first of all, then when we're talking about animals we can't talk to directly, we have to define what we're going to say, what we're going to conclude is pleasure. So if we conclude pleasure as, you know, my dog just going, yes, right on, then we go, okay, that's good. We think you're enjoying that. Okay, so do animals have sex that they simply enjoy? Yes. How do we know? Well, because a lot of times non-procreative sex happens between two members of the same sex. There can be social reasons, social cementing reasons. There can be practice reasons. There can be dominance establishment reasons. So in a lot of populations, there's a, maybe an alpha male, and I know that gorillas, for example, do this, where they will have their preferred subdominant male sexual partners, and they are actually very protective over those male partners. And this isn't really about their sexual identity, which we'll get to in a minute, but it's more just about establishing, I'm the alpha, this is what I like, this is who I like, and I'm going with that. And, they're not caught up with, ooh, but should I be doing this? Am I gay? Like, the big gorillas are like, existentially wondering about what their future looks like. No, humans are definitely the ones that make things more complicated than they need to be. So that was an awfully long rant. Kevin, okay, do we observe homosexuality in invertebrates? Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And a great example from the invertebrate world, this is something that I really think is quite compelling. So we all, or maybe we don't all, but we appreciate, okay, my dogs are going to start fighting now. That's awesome. Stop that. We appreciate that bedbug sex is very traumatic and violent. Bedbug sex. This is traumatic insemination, not homosexual just at the moment. I'm just giving you a little bit of a background on bedbug sex. Males have these super sharp, stabby penises that they stab into their female partners, and they don't actually deposit sperm anywhere close to the genital openings of the females. They instead simply stab the females directly into their hemolymph, and the sperm will travel to her ovaries. And so this is technically called traumatic insemination for good reason. And females have evolved secondary structures that are called, they're called spermaleges in bedbugs, but they're these secondary structures that help them heal from these sexual stab wounds that they get, because these females can actually die if they get a lot of stab wounds or if a stab wound becomes infected. So where am I going with this? Well, where I'm going is in the bat bug, which is a bug that's actually quite closely related to bedbugs. My dogs are kind of going crazy. Yeah, sorry. The bat bug females have also evolved these secondary structures to kind of keep the stab wounds healing. But in bat bugs, there's so much homosexual traumatic insemination that males have actually evolved a secondary genital structure to protect themselves from homosexual traumatic insemination. Whoa. And now, that's not even the most interesting part. The most interesting part is that there's another subpopulation now of female bat bugs that have evolved secondary genitalia to look like the male genitalia. Oh, wow. Evolution is crazy and awesome. And I wish I had diagrams, because that probably would be a little more clear if I did. And my dogs, why are you doing this right now? I'm live and there's like 193 people watching. Could you stop, please? Thank you. Thanks. So thank you very much for that question, Kevin. Ooh, and transgender is another question that came in about, are any animals transgender? And this is something I wonder about. And this is something that I think biologically we can get evidence for it in terms of chromosome patterns and genetic data. But how do we get evidence for the most important part of transgenderism, in my opinion, which is how do animals struggle with their own identity as being transgender? It would be really ridiculous of us to assume that other primates don't have issues with transgenderism. They are as complicated as we are. Their brains are as, nearly as big as ours are in a lot of ways. They have emotions. They have a lot of really complex social patterns and behaviors. So we would be really silly to assume that they don't have something akin to transgenderism. But again, that's very difficult for us to really tap into and to understand. But I think as we increase our understanding into what that means in our own species, like that transgenderism is actually a thing. It's a biological phenomenon that people are afflicted, and they have a more difficult time fitting in because their gender is not cemented to them in their head, and this becomes a real issue with identity. It isn't simply a behavior or a belief or anything like that. It is something that is actually quite real and quite an interruption to sort of normal human society and life as we've unfolded it in the Western world. So definitely an issue that I'd like to keep following. And hey, from Puerto Rico, Jose, how's it going? Oh, you guys, so many awesome comments. Hey, okay, so another thing I wanted to mention, because a lot of the questions that you sent in kind of had to do with levels of gayness, if you will. If we're going to put it in just a totally blunt fashion, let's call it like it is. There's 3 levels, if you will, of what we would consider to be homosexual activity in the animal kingdom. And I am talking about animals from tiny invertebrates to the largest mammals and, of course, primates. There's homosexual behavior. And so homosexual behavior is the first one. It can be defined as any act that, that is of sexual nature between 2 members of the same gender. That is everywhere. I have yet to find a species that does not undertake some form of same-sex sexual behavior. I literally wrote the book on this topic. The book is called Wild Sex, and I haven't yet found a species where I haven't seen an example of this. So same-sex sexual behavior. So those of you that wrote in and said, you know, my grandma said it's unnatural, go tell grandma, tell grandma that that I just have, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's in every phylum, and that's it. Okay, so that's homosexual behavior. That is different than something we call homosexual preference, which indicates that an individual prefers to have sexual relations with someone of the same gender, despite the fact that members of the opposite gender are readily available to them. This, again, is very, very common in the vertebrate world, in a lot of bird species, in a lot of grazing mammals, and a lot of primates. There's a lot, it's quite common for an animal to choose a sexual partner of the same gender. Again, for many of those reasons that I noted before: social cement, dominance hierarchy, bonding between male partners. I read an interesting paper once that was actually about, I think it was about a big predatory bird. Was it a hawk or perhaps eagles, where there were, they would separate off into their mating pairs, which are generally male-female for the bulk of the mating season. However, in this particular mating season, there was a shortage of females, and that resulted in a lot of females having 2 male partners instead of just 1 to deal with this surplus of males. So what ended up happening a lot of the times were the 2 males would actually start having sexual relations with each other. And biologists concluded that this was a show of social cement for them to sort of solidify their bond together as the partners of this one female. And that speaks to a really significant level of reflection and understanding on the part of the birds. And you know, people don't necessarily love anthropomorphizing and, you know, talking about other animals as though they are humans and sort of ascribing human characteristics to animals. But at the same time, I do think it's a valuable tool for allowing ourselves to observe what they actually do. Because if we look at these little bird threesomes, and these males are fornicating on top of taking care of the babies, on top of, you know, it's part of the everyday life. It really isn't something that they're probably struggling with on the level of sexual identity that many humans do. Now, that brings me to the third category, which is homosexual identity. This is mostly a construct of the human species, where we say to ourselves, I have an identity, and that identity means that I only have this type of sex or that type of sex. And that is really largely dictated by many aspects of Western society. Our sexuality is determined a lot by outside cues, nurture cues, rather than nature cues. And so there's really no reason why there shouldn't be more of a sexual smorgasbord on our plates, but I guess it isn't usually because of all the other things that, you know, people are doing day to day. And of course, all of the social stigma and the gosh, what is maybe the right way to say that? The inability of humans to just accept other humans for what they are and what they represent, I guess. And people have good reasons for maybe not allowing themselves to fully realize who they are because they're afraid that society will not accept them. And I think that's where humans run into trouble, because we always face this discord between our biology and our society, which isn't really taking into account aspects of our biology that are really important. So the notion of sexual fluidity works much more for me as a human. I mean, as a human that observes sexual activity in other humans and in other animals, it seems to me that the rest of the animal kingdom really adheres to the sexual fluidity concept, which is just a sliding scale of sexuality. You know, of course, to create offspring, one needs to match male and female gametes. Yes, that has to happen. And so if you are gay in the animal kingdom, you can have all the gay sex you want to have, but when you need to have procreative sex, just go find an opposite sex partner. That's kind of how it goes for a lot of the time. So that's our three that I really would like to see. Oh, can we see your dogs at the end? Of course, Michaela. That's just kind of what I like to keep in mind, because, you know, as someone that's written greatly about sex, but now I'm writing about motherhood, or I actually just finished writing about motherhood, of course, like we have our #1 biological initiative, which is to kind of reproduce as well as to survive. But aspects of survival include sex, and sex isn't always meant to be reproductive. Okay, super duper duper. I got a really interesting question from Amber that was, is homosexuality nature, nurture, or both? It seems that so many people are polarized on this, and while it confounds me that acceptance seems to hinge on it not being a choice, I'm curious about science. Yeah, me too. I am definitely curious about the science on that, and I mean, I've looked into that quite a bit in terms of our species, but of course, our species is one of the only ones where we can really tease out nature from nurture, because if we take other animals out of their natural setting and put them in some kind of a captive situation, it's really hard to say how that's impacting them in ways other than their sex lives, and it often results in a decrease in their sex life, which is not surprising considering they're in captivity and they're, you know, who knows what else is going on there. But as far as in the human species, you raise an interesting point, which is that, and I guess I've kind of touched on this a little bit, that we come to expect what our sexuality should be. And I think that having a more open mind about what animals are and what animals do is only better for us as far as acceptance and understanding that humans don't fit into a neat little box of homo or hetero at any given time. I mean, a lot do, but a lot don't. And that takes it back to that very first point I made, that every human individual, we seem to have no problem understanding that every human individual is an individual with their own preferences and needs and partners and desires. We must also keep in mind that animals are like that too. Animals, you know, two chimpanzees could be completely different in terms of what one prefers and what doesn't. So yeah, you may be like, you know, Tim the chimpanzee is totally gay, and, you know, Tim #2, the chimpanzee, is not. And maybe they have, you know, this is something that makes biology very complicated very quickly, because how do biologists account for such crazy diversity? We're working on it, but it's a fun puzzle to keep working on. Okay, let's see. Nicole, yes, Nicole, you sent in some really cool questions. Gay animals on YouTube, okay. Yes, oh, interesting. Okay, so yeah, just this is hitting on something else that came up before. If homosexuality is natural, then people come up with the argument that animals would go extinct if they all had, you know, I guess if an animal population was entirely comprised of homosexual individuals, yes, I suppose that could be the case. But most populations, as I've sort of touched on, have many individuals that sort of have different levels. And so, you know, I guess if an animal completely lost its ability to reproduce sexually with the opposite sex, then it would become a different, perhaps cloning species. And, you know, there's tons of different ways that could go, but, you know, that's not a very Darwinian view of how an animal should be. And that said, we can definitely have that Darwinian view. Yeah, we need to survive. We need to pass on those genetic blueprints, but there's a lot of other activities that we do that don't have anything to do with passing on our genetic blueprints. Some of those activities are sex. And Nicole, you also had another one that was, are there some graphics? Okay, what about biological sex and sexuality? Intersex. Ooh, that's a really interesting question. Intersex is sort of, again, when individuals in a population fall into kind of a middle ground as far as gender is concerned. So we may actually be able to consider some individuals as intersex when they, as human individuals are intersex. There's all kinds of very functional ways that humans can be. It's not a specialty of mine, but I do know that in animals as populous and as complicated as we are, there's gonna basically be representation from all extremes for the most part, as there will be for many other species too. So Matthew, Matthew, hey, you had a lot of cool questions. Species like, oh yeah, I know of species like clownfish where a male can change to a female. And species can reproduce via parthenogenesis. Yeah, so clownfish represent this really interesting example where animals change gender. They have the ability to actually switch their gender based on the ecological conditions that they're currently encountering. What? And I mean, these are fish. This is a vertebrate. This is something that's actually, all things considered, pretty closely related to a human. So the fact that they can do this is pretty remarkable. My favorite example of animals that change gender are the slipper shells, or Crepidula fornicata. I love that name. Fornicata. I mean, come on. These guys will make big piles, and they look like little limpets. Well, they are little limpets, kind of. They're little marine snails that actually form vertical towers. So one of them will be on the bottom, and there will be 7 to 10 other individuals making this little snail tower. And of course, they're aquatic, so you'll see this in sort of the not in deep water, but in the intertidal zone and just sort of below the tide line. Pardon me. And the individual on the bottom is the female. And as we talked a little bit about that, about animals that have both genders last week, and that the female role is always the more expensive role. So this poor little snail on the bottom is the female, and she is the one with the eggs, and the ones that are all sitting on top of her are the males, and they send down the sperm. Now, when that female finally bites the dust, the next to bottom one will then convert into the female, and so on the process goes. So there's usually only one female in a stack of Crepidula, and the bottom one is the female, and the rest will get their turn to be female as they go. It seems like kind of an interesting strategy, just based on having the ability to get around really environments, first of all, that are kind of hostile. The intertidal can be and is, and also just the astounding ability to all of a sudden change the gametes that you're producing. Could you imagine if humans could do that? Like if I all of a sudden just decided, I think I'm just gonna be a guy. Like that would just be ridiculous. And yet animals have this capability, and it's something, yeah, it's why I love biology, that's for sure. How strong is the evidence for genetic components of homosexuality? Actually, that's a question I am not terribly familiar with. Exactly what genetics would comprise. I don't think we have a specific idea of exactly the kinds of genetics involved. Epigenetics is also a phenomenon that's been implicated in a lot of issues surrounding sexuality and transgenderism. And epigenetics is a bit of a crazy notion to get your mind around. What epigenetics is, it sort of takes a look at how each gene's own environment can affect the way that it is expressed. And so you have those genes, we have the gene that codes for the nose. Okay, great. That's always going to be the nose. No problem. Those are the nose genes. We get the nose. Genes that are subjected to epigenetic processes may look way different. You may have structures or behaviors or physiological phenomenon that can vary according to epigenetics that we don't really see so much, that it's not so black and white. And I guess maybe that's the bottom line for most of what we talk about when notions of transgenderism, homosexuality, heterosexuality, you know, when we talk about all these things that humans make so complicated, we have to just sort of appreciate that they are complicated. Not everybody really, you know, not everybody gets it one way or the other. And I guess that's the bottom line when it really comes to this kind of thing. Now, I'm finished with the questions on my sheet. If anybody else, I'm just going to scroll through. There's not a biological need to explore transgender. Oh, Rebecca, did I say something weird? I'm not quite following your question there. Survival of the fittest. Weak isn't a label. Weak is what you are in the animal kingdom. It's the rule of survival of the fittest. Totally agree. Erin. Oh, thanks, Erin. So you're a zookeeper, okay? And explain to guests what's going on with same-sex animals. Hey, you raise a really good point, Erin, about sex in general. Animals consider sex to be just part of what they do. And that sounds so silly and flippant to say it that way, but humans make sex such a crazy, ridiculous thing that it has to be this, and it has to be done in the dark and on a bed and under sheets, and we have to be very, you know, prudish about how we do it and all these kinds of things. Animals consider sex to just be another thing that goes on in their day. I mean, it's just it's as natural as having breakfast. It's just what you do. And so, yeah, I'm sure you people in wildlife parks and zoos probably have a whole, and you know, that's why you see people are, you know, putting videos of animals having sex on YouTube, and like it's this huge deal. And it is, it's kind of cool to see that, but it is what it is. Animals have sex all the time for just, that's, you know, we're the only ones, okay? Consider humans are the ones that are being prude there. Oh dear, what about narwhal? Elizabeth, we have another question about narwhals. I sure wish I knew more about narwhals. Narwhals are amazing, and somebody sent me a picture of a little toy. Actually, it was a narwhal that had a plastic seal that you could spear onto its horn. I thought, wow, that's realistic. How about every mating ritual? What if a bird crest is smaller? So Pierre, thanks for that question. So bird crests and bird feathers are often sexual signals in birds, and so males will often have very decorative plumage, and in some cases bigger may be better. Not always. In some cases more ornate might be better, in some cases sharper might be better, or rounder might be better, or, you know, stretchier might be better. There's all kinds of aspects to a male's appearance that are shaped by female preference. And that goes right back down to the notion of the cost of sperm versus the cost of eggs. So a lot of cases, males are going to be the ones that are having to work hard for a female's affections. And yeah, it might not always be the male with the toughest stance. A lot of times we do see males that are very tough getting the ladies because they can secure resources, they can secure territories, they can help take care of the lady and her offspring. However, a lot of times ladies choose the exact opposite. They choose the guys that they know are going to actually be kind, really, and not too aggressive towards them. And also guys that might be sort of more responsible dads, if you will. So and all of that can occur within a small class of animals. There's so much diversity just according to the ecological requirements of the animals in question. So let's see. Homosexuality raises very different issues in animals where intercourse is either meh or downright unpleasant. It doesn't bring the reproduction or closest. That's a question or a comment from John. Well, that's a really interesting point. I would say there's definitely a lot of sex that happens that is unpleasant. No question. I might even say the majority of vertebrate sex might not be terribly enjoyable. However, closeness is another aspect of that kind of comes from having different partners. So there may be a functional reason for sex, such as the social cement or the hierarchy, where sex isn't really enjoyable, but it functions to change your position in the community in some way. There are other instances where we actually get pretty good indication that sex is pleasurable, even from invertebrates. Things like earwigs tend to have, earwig females tend to select males that have longer phalluses based on the supposed stimulation to their own reproductive tract. That's actually what has been written in the scientific literature. And so there could very well be pleasure at levels that we can't consider. Does this make animals homosexual? Yeah, in some cases, I would say that that could be a possibility. There's all kinds of phenomenon, the jailhouse phenomenon, that kind of thing, when there are simply no other choices of sexual partner. And so animals will then move towards having homosexual sex because, of course, they simply cannot find an opposite sex partner. That's not terribly surprising. And in populations that have been severely decreased for whatever reason, either human caused or not, that don't have enough reproductive males, this is a really big issue. This is something that we actually see in our species with the surplus of males that are in China based on the one-child policy. There's so many extra males. We're actually seeing an increase in the level of homosexuality in populations there because there are no female partners. So that could be even another reason why homosexuality occurs. It doesn't always need to be simple as, do we make babies or don't we? Another one gone. I can't get over the Tower of Limpets. I know, Olive, it's the best. And if you just see one of those, Mark says, I think everyone should do what they want so long as they want to do and doesn't infringe on the rights of others. Totally agree. Animals included, since I feel animals are better than humans. You know, Mark, there are days when I feel that way as well. You know, I love humans, and I think about us a lot. I think about us in the context of our own evolution. I mean, does anybody else do that? Sometimes I lay out at night just thinking, what are we doing? What's happening to our species? Like in 50 million years, are humans even going to be here? I don't know. Those are pretty heavy questions. But anyways, I do appreciate how complicated we make very, very simple things. I'm highly entertained by it, in fact, because, you know, animals, when we sort of look at the beautiful simplicity with which they can accomplish adequate nutrition, protection, reproduction, family or group construct, all of these things that humans just overcomplicate to the max, and we say, why would we do something as totally commonsensical as eat all of the food that we need to eat to feed our bodies in the right way? Why wouldn't we just go ahead and have some ice cream and call it good? You know, that's what humans do. Humans are so weird, and other animals just don't have that option. So they don't do things that make them complicated in ways that doesn't complicate their biology, which is actually probably pretty good, but it highlights how strange we are. Ingrid says, I've heard of 2 male penguins adopting a chick. Is this something that has happened a lot? Great question. I have heard of those stories as well. I haven't got a specific literature reference in my mind, but I definitely have heard of examples where, again, if there is an egg and for whatever reason, a female may have gone off with another male, the female may have been killed, who knows what. And 2 males can definitely nurture the eggs. And in fact, penguins, the males are the ones that often just sit on those eggs anyway, even if their female partner hasn't gone away for whatever reason. So the males are kind of dutiful dads, those penguins. They kind of, you know, flop their little selves on top of the egg and keep it warm in the very chilly conditions. Hey, thank you, Bill. This is awesome. What about crossbreeds like coyote wolves? Hey, great question, Angela. I worry about domestic dogs. So maybe I won't bring up domestic dogs, but yeah, coyote wolves, sort of hybridizing in the natural world. What happens then? It's something that absolutely happens, and in some cases, we can consider that to potentially be the road to a speciation event. In some cases, animals, you know, for example, the good old cow and donkey example, where they can mate and they can create a viable living thing, but that viable living thing is not itself viable. So there are all kinds of animals that are close enough to intersex and breed, so to speak, but what happens with the products of that breeding, as in whether or not the individuals that are created are themselves fertile, is the next question to be answered. In a lot of cases, they may be. And with birds, a lot of populations, for example, of different chickadee species that have very specific habitats, through deforestation practices, a lot of those habitats are being destroyed and those species are coming together. We see some really interesting examples of birds from one species. The females actually prefer the guys from a different species that they're now coming into contact with based on the human activity. So there's all kinds of intermingling and interspeciation that can go on, and that in terms of nature usually doesn't happen because of timing or habitat or some kind of a behavioral block to it. This is where humans are actually having a really big impact on how these species will function in the future based on what we're doing to the environment. And we're putting new species into contact, we're getting other species out of contact. You know, there's a whole bunch of different variables that we're throwing on the table, and sort of looking at how animals adapt their sex lives to the things that we do is actually quite interesting. Oh, Ian Simpson, very interesting question. Has homophobia been observed in any other species other than humans? Wow, what an interesting question. I don't think so. Not that I have observed. I would say probably, you know, because as apes, we are all capable of, you know, we're capable of being jerks sometimes and nice sometimes. So I can imagine that there's probably some animals that, you know, as individuals may, for one reason or another, discriminate. But that's something that's tough for us to acknowledge from other species because we just don't speak their language. If we could somehow communicate directly and ask, that would be awesome. And I know there was that story this week with the orca that has been taught a few human words. And I do understand it is still in captivity. There's always two sides to all of these stories. It's not awesome for that orca, that's for sure. I don't want to say that it is, but because we can't directly communicate with other vertebrates, and even ones that we think are super intelligent, things like dolphins would be a great one. Oh, Frida, are you kidding me? Because I am in front of a whole bunch of people right now. Dolphins could potentially, I mean, they're so intelligent. Even things like octopus are super intelligent. If there was just a way that we could somehow understand each other and understand how they put their populations together, things like that. I mean, dolphins is another great example of homosexuality as well. Homosexuality and extreme intelligence. Dolphins are actually what is called hypersexual, and this refers to the fact that they have sex a lot. Dolphin males, and especially young males, will have sex, oh my gosh, almost every hour, on the hour, you know, 24 hours a day. There is so much sex that goes on with dolphins, and especially young male dolphins. And what's thought is that these male pods of dolphins form very strong and close, yes, sexual bonds with each other, but really they're like packs of bros, if you know what I mean, that will then keep their own specific ladies safe and protected. But with dolphin males, sexual intercourse is a huge component of bonding between males and really keeping the males in that specific pod very, very close to one another. They are long lasting. They are extremely meaningful, and that's, you know, that's an animal I would say that most humans consider to be, you know, on a level of intelligence that is much higher than many other creatures. Homophobia, oh gosh, I wish we would maybe understand how we might be able to quantify that. But as far as, you know, whether or not animals think homophobia or exhibit homophobia in these populations, that is something I haven't read about. That's a very interesting question. So James, what do you think is the #1 reason some animals mate for life? So there are a lot of great reasons, and many of the great reasons are ones that come to mind right away. It's easier, You already have your routines. You have a familiarity both in terms of the kind of sex that you do, the kind of ways that you parent, the kind of foods that you get for your nest. You know, if we can sort of equate that to anything that humans do, you and your partner probably have habits that that work for you, and maybe your second kid or your third kid, it just gets easier because you're used to it. So in a lot of cases, we see that animals mate for life, and we can say that, it's easier for them. And partners that have been together longer tend to get pregnant quicker. And again, it's that familiarity, it's that comfort. And females, especially female vertebrates, generally speaking, are much more likely to get pregnant with a preferred partner. So basically, yeah, that's one side of it. It's just the familiarity. Now, keep in mind though, when I say that animals mate for life, I don't mean that they mate exclusively for life. What I mean is that they may actually be social partners for life, and that we do see in a lot of species. Social partners for life. A lot of them, most of them in fact, are always getting more sex on the side. But that's not, this notion of betrayal, right? Like if a human did that, like if I was married to someone and we had, 20 years together, and all of a sudden he goes off and sires a whole bunch of other offspring, I'd be like, what? Like, that's not allowed. Again, this is where humans overcomplicate it. Maybe birds just, they all do it. We know that they all do it. Maybe they just don't talk about it. But yeah, the fact is, even animals that mate for life are not generally exclusively sexing for life. They can definitely be friends for life, though. Is it possibility? Is animal sex is way more interesting? Oh, you bet it is more interesting than humans. And I say this a lot, Zoe, which is like, animals have the crazy, humans, our sex lives are super boring. I mean, well, no, I would say that, no, actually, okay, I'll rephrase that. Most sort of married people that are in sexual relationships, their sex lives are super boring. It's actually thought in humans that there's some studies done by, the classic studies by Masters and Johnson that suggest that same-sex partners in humans actually have way better sex because of gender empathy. We just know what a member of the same gender would want and what would feel good to, I know what I got, and I know what feels good there. So, somebody who also has those bits might be more tuned into that. And that's, again, another interesting factor about homosexuality that we've known about for many decades. The work of Masters and Johnson is not new. And so, yeah, there's just so many ways that animal sex is much more interesting than human. Is it possibly a mental illness? Michael, homosexuality a mental illness? No, absolutely not. I mean, it is something that is tied up in our ability to philosophize about what we want for ourselves. So in that way, I think that a healthy sexuality in anybody incorporates aspects of mental functioning. But is it a mental illness? No. Drifting somewhat, do you see animals that take on behavior of the opposite gender? That's another question from Matthew. Yes. We often see a lot of, what we call transvestitism in the animal kingdom, where individuals will appear to be a member of the opposite sex for various reasons. A lot of times it has to do with coercive sex in, for example, small reptiles or things like damselflies or dragonflies, where there's a lot of very violent sex. Males are aggressive towards females, and it's that age-old, she's got a spermatheca. If that spermatheca is full, she doesn't want any more. Males are like, wait, you don't have mine yet. You will take some more, blah, 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 arms races, arms races. And so in a lot of cases, females actually have evolved to appear as males so that they just don't get bugged as often. And there are actually some species where the next step is that there are the she-males that have evolved back to being more like feminine she-males, and there's all sorts of really interesting patterns as far as physical appearance goes to appear as a member of the opposite sex. As far as animals taking on behavior of the opposite gender, I guess another example would be where males predominantly take over childcare, because it does happen, and I'm hoping that Wild Dads will be a book on the roster at some point. Wild Mums is certainly the more common one. Oh, I got a little few likes over that. Okay, awesome, guys. No, but there are definitely some animals where dad is the one that does all the work. And of course, one of the best examples of that is with the seahorses and pipefishes, where males are actually outfitted with full pouches that are vascularized and attached to their body's physiological systems, that in the most sophisticated examples, these males can give nutrients and oxygen to these offspring. They are literally pregnant, although the way that it happens is kind of interesting. What will happen with seahorses is they'll have these pouches. So it's not like a kangaroo at all, but kangaroos have pouches too. Neat. It's a different kind of pouch where a female, once she has either been accepted by a male or has selected a male, she will go and put in her eggs into that pouch. And then he can fertilize those eggs. And every single egg that's in his pouch, he knows he's fertilized it. And that's key, because that's what every other vertebrate dad doesn't have, is paternity certainty. So this guy fertilizes these eggs, he knows they're his, and that's why these kinds of systems can evolve, because there is a reason for this guy to get invested. He knows they're his kids. When there's internal fertilization, whether you're a bird that has it, or a mammal, a vertebrate of some kind, if there's internal fertilization, males don't have paternity certainty. And so it doesn't make biological sense for them to contribute a lot to that offspring. And so that's what's led to this diversification, especially in things like seahorses, where males can actually say, these are mine, I know they're mine, and I will invest because of that. What about green sea turtles? Since there are more females being hatched because of the warmer beaches, will they show the same sex mating in their future? Wow, great question, Sean. I don't know about that one, but that would be a really cool one to look into. Angela, or maybe not just as crossbreeding, but like when you see a duck and a goose's mates and they left their flock and lost their partners. Yes. Oh, I see what you mean. So will an animal, okay, so Angela's asking sort of about animals that kind of, will they find each other, possibly different species to kind of associate if they have become lost from their social group. Yeah, social groups and sexuality are very, very close together, and it's certainly possible for cross-species interactions to occur in that way. In fact, a television show that I did for Animal Planet, we went all around the world and looked at specifically these kinds of interactions. What happens when all of a sudden you do have, a pangolin together with an aardvark? what happens? Are they friends? One of my favorite examples of that was a donkey and a goat that actually had formed a very strong bond with each other. It was not a sexual bond, but it was a friendship bond. Maybe that's kind of what you meant. Okay, cool. Val, I know there's some species of fish that can change from female to male in the absence of a dominant. Yes. So this behavior, and we've touched on that a little bit before, Val, too, with these species that can change sex. What are they classified as? Well, yeah, good question. The specific term that is applied to that is escaping me just at the moment, but it is absolutely the hormone factors or certain chemical factors that are in them. There's certain signals that they can take that sets it into motion all of these physiological processes, and all of that biology is not terribly well worked out. We can observe that they're doing this, but as yet we don't actually understand all the mechanics behind it. Elsa, this may be a silly question, but are animals actually aware of gender? Do they actually have a preference? Oh, fabulous green wall. Thanks, Elsa. I do like my colors. Yeah, no, is gender identity a thing? I would argue that probably in most mammals it is, at least mammals, probably birds, probably most vertebrates, because female mammals play such different ecological roles than males do. It would be you know, there's sort of these basal biological rules that are ingrained in the behaviors and the physiologies of animal, but are they ingrained in their, this thing we're talking about, their consciousness? That's a tough question. That's a tough question. I don't know. I wish that I did. Some species do it for dominance. Yes, Hunter, they absolutely do. Hermaphroditism, yes. Bruce is talking about the animals that can be both male and females at the same time. Fail to mace. Oh, protandus. Oh, thanks, Bruce. Thank you. Okay, so Bruce is actually saying that the clownfish changing their sex is protogynous. I hope I'm saying that. Protogynous. That's a female to male. Or protoandrous, male to female. Thank you, Bruce. Those concepts were totally escaping me at the moment. Ooh, Zoe, interesting question. Studied or know anything about the sex lives of prehistoric animals? Wow, can you imagine? That is an interesting question. No. Other than, I mean, you know, paleontologists have a ridiculous job as it is, even reconstructing what animals might have looked like. But that would be a very interesting field of paleontology, you know, like ancient sex. How did that go down? And we certainly know that ancient reptiles like dinosaurs had, you know, for the most part, were egg laying. But, you know, what happened as those eggs were being laid? Wow. Did I miss the couch auction? No, but I have to, it's as close as my cord will get to the, I like sitting on the floor. Is the couch pet free? No. All right, guys, so let's take a few more questions and then I'll probably sign off for today. Jeremy is asking, are there animals that may choose male-male, female-female mating instead of regular procreation as a lifelong mating choice? Absolutely. And we see this interestingly a lot in animals, birds like seagulls and albatrosses. I have an episode of Wild Sex, the series that I write for Seeker, that's coming up on this exact thing. A lot of albatrosses will form long-term female-female bonds, upwards of 10, 20 years, like really long periods of time, despite the fact that male partners are available to them. Will they copulate together, the two females? Absolutely. Will one of these females go and get some sperm when she needs to? Yep, that's how it goes. So basically, these are long-term lesbian partners, if you want to call it that. That's what we would call it if it was two humans doing it. And when they require some sperm for sexual reproduction, one of them goes off to get it. Simple as that. Men are usually pretty good about giving it out. Well, I don't know about male albatross, but okay. Everybody's talking about my couch. Why is everybody talking about my couch? I'm so confused. Okay. Maybe there was supposed to be a couch. I really don't know. Okay. Do some species of animals have long-term memory if they are apart for long periods and remember each other? Yes. So if there are certain partners or certain strong bonds that have formed between partners, absolutely. This kind of capability to recognize a long lost partner is ingrained in many, many species. But recognition doesn't necessarily mean a good thing. I mean, partners could recognize each other, or you know, in terms of a negative experience or a positive one. It's certainly possible for us and for our closest primate relatives to have long-term bonds that stay in our brains for many, many years. I did a show, well, it was that Animal Planet show where we went with Damien Aspinall, who's an English naturalist who raised a gorilla at his facility in London, and then took the gorilla to a massive plot of land that he has in Gabon. And I think it was 6 years later, it was a while, he went back to Gabon to see if he could find this one gorilla, and the gorilla recognized him right away. And there was just no question that this was his friend. That tells you a lot about the capabilities that animals have to feel, to remember, to have had a cognitive positive experience with another being, because it wasn't even the same species in this case, and to remember that and to draw upon that many, many years later. Very, very telling. All right, so let's see, what else have I got? I'm gonna say one more and then I'm gonna sign off, but there's so much talk going on about the couch. I'm super confused about that. Maybe somebody, oh, is that trolls? I don't even know. I'm like, was this I'm not sure. Oh, the couch people are just trolls. They get a kick out of flooding live feeds with the nonsense. Oh, there's so much I don't know. There's just so darn much that I don't know. And lastly, there's one from Jeremy who is saying, do animals have procreation for pleasure? Well, procreative sex can certainly be pleasurable sex. That's definitely true. I would say a lot of the times the best sex is maybe the procreative sex in animals like primates, because we know that for females, we are more likely to become pregnant when we have had sex with a preferred partner. So did you mean, did animals have sex for pleasure? In that case, absolutely. Absolutely. But yes, there are also cases where the best sex is the procreative sex. And I would argue that that's probably the case in our species too. So, that was a lot of talking. I just did a whole lot of talking. And so for all those of you who asked to see the dogs again, doggies, say hi. Annie. Okay, wait, maybe I'll just get her for you. Here. Okay, they're coming over because I called them. Come and say bye to everybody. Whoops. Oh, okay, say bye to everybody. Thank you guys for watching this one, and please keep the comments and the questions coming. This is just such a neat thing to do, and I'm really happy to kind of answer questions. Yeah, maybe once every couple of weeks or something like that. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.